History is filled with chilling tales, stories of ghosts and demons we tell around campfires to give our friends a good scare. Most of the time, that's all they are, just stories. Fictional tales designed to prey on our most primal fears. But what happens when a story feels like more than just a story? What happens when the legend is so powerful that it's written down, passed on for generations, and becomes woven into the history of a place? In the rich tapestry of American folklore, there's one story that stands out. It's about a death that legend says was caused by a ghost. This isn't just some vague campfire tale. It's a famous legend about a family tormented by what they claimed was a talking, intelligent, and malevolent entity that called itself the Blair Witch. The story goes that for 4 years, it held a family and a community captive, and its reign of terror ended in a death blamed on the supernatural. This is a story where folklore and fact have bled together, leaving behind a tale that's still told 2 centuries later. To understand the nightmare, you first have to understand the dream. Our story begins not with a ghost, but with a man named John Bell. Born in North Carolina in 1750, Bell was a product of the American frontier spirit. He was a farmer and, by all accounts, a hard-working and respected man. In 1782, he married Lucy Williams, and together they started building a life and a family. For years, they did well in North Carolina. But like many in their generation, they were drawn by the promise of the West. In the winter of 1804, John Bell, then in his mid-50s, packed up his family and everything they owned and made the tough journey across the mountains into Tennessee. They settled in a fertile patch of Robertson County known as the Red River Bottomland, in a community that would one day be called Adams, Tennessee. Here, the Bell family truly thrived. John bought a large piece of land, eventually expanding it to over 300 acres. They built a big log home, cleared fields, and raised 9 children. John Bell became a prominent figure in the community, a successful planter, and was even made an elder at the Red River Baptist Church. By all measures, the Bells were a picture of early 19th century success. They were pious, prosperous, and well-liked. They had carved their piece of the American dream out of the wilderness. For 13 years, their home was a place of peace and faith. But according to the legend, in the summer of 1817, something went terribly wrong. The dream curdled into a nightmare as an unseen presence began to creep into their lives, turning their home into a prison of fear. The beginning was subtle, as these things often are. It didn't start with a scream, but with a strange sight. The story goes that one afternoon in 1817, John Bell was inspecting his cornfield when he saw an animal unlike any he'd ever seen. Accounts passed down through the family describe it as having the body of a large dog and the head of a rabbit. Bell, a seasoned frontiersman, raised his gun and fired, but the creature supposedly vanished. He was unnerved but tried to write it off as a trick of the light. Soon after, other strange things were reported. His son, Drury Bell, saw an unusually large and mysterious bird on a fence post. His youngest daughter, Betsy, saw what looked like a girl in a green dress swinging from an oak tree branch. And one of the enslaved men on the farm, a man named Dean, reported being followed on his evening walks by a large black dog that would simply materialize and then disappear. These were isolated, strange occurrences. Odd, sure, but maybe explainable. But then, the strangeness moved inside. It began with sounds, faint knocking and thumping on the cabin's exterior walls at night. The family would rush outside, armed and ready to confront a prowler, only to find no one there. Night after night, the sounds returned, getting louder. Soon, new sounds joined in from inside the house. The family heard what they described as rats gnawing at their bedposts, but when they checked, the wood was untouched. They heard the sound of heavy chains being dragged across the floors, stones being dropped from the ceiling, and quiet, choking sounds that seemed to come from the air itself. For a whole year, the Bell family kept this escalating strangeness to themselves. John Bell was a proud man. He didn't want his family speaking about it, fearing he'd be ridiculed. He and his sons took the house apart looking for a rational explanation. They checked the floors, the walls, the chimney, everything. They found nothing. There was no source for the sounds. They felt trapped in their own home with an invisible force that was growing bolder. They had no idea this was only the beginning. The entity that would become the center of this legend was just getting started. The shift from strange noises to direct physical torment was, as the story goes, swift and terrifying. The unseen force began ripping blankets and pillows off the children's beds, throwing them across the room. It had crossed a line. It wasn't just a presence anymore. It was an attacker. And it had a favorite target, John Bell's youngest daughter, Elizabeth, known as Betsy. For reasons that have never been clear, the entity focused its most vicious attacks on her. It started with slaps that left red welts on her skin. Then came pinching and scratching. She would cry out as invisible needles seemed to prick her. Most frighteningly, her hair would be violently pulled, sometimes tied into knots, or even fastened to the bedpost. The family was helpless, forced to watch as their daughter was tormented by something they couldn't see or fight. As the physical attacks grew worse, something even more disturbing began. The family started hearing faint whispers, like an old woman humming hymns. The whispers grew stronger until, one evening, the entity spoke in a clear voice for the first time. This was a shock. They weren't dealing with a simple haunting, but an intelligence. And it had a lot to say. Over the next 3 years, the voice became a constant in the Bell home. It had a personality. It could hold conversations, quote scripture from 2 different sermons preached miles apart, and gossip about the neighbors' secrets. When asked what it was, its answers were grand and mysterious. "I am a spirit from everywhere," it once claimed, "heaven, hell, the earth. I have been created millions of years." It sometimes took on names like Black Dog, but it seemed to respond most when called Kate. The family started using the name after guessing it might be the spirit of a neighbor, Kate Batts, with whom John Bell had a land dispute. Though historical evidence suggests the real Kate Batts had nothing to do with the legend, the name stuck. The entity became known as the Bell Witch, or simply Kate. And now, Kate was a terrifying, all-knowing, and inescapable part of the family's life. After a year of enduring the terror in secret, John Bell finally confided in his neighbor, James Johnston. Johnston was skeptical, as anyone would be, and agreed to spend the night. What he reportedly witnessed removed all doubt. He heard the voices, saw the attacks, and by morning, he told Bell he believed it was a spirit. With Johnston's confirmation, the story spread like wildfire through Robertson County. The Bell Witch became a local sensation. People traveled from all over, driven by fear and morbid curiosity, hoping to witness the phenomena for themselves. The Bell home became a public spectacle. The entity, Kate, seemed to love the attention. According to the legend, she was a temperamental performer. For some visitors, she'd put on a show, answering questions and revealing their secrets. For others, especially skeptics, she'd stay silent. The most famous visitor story, the one that cemented the legend in American folklore, involves none other than General Andrew Jackson. Sometime around 1819, Jackson, already a military hero, supposedly decided to investigate. The tale says that as he and his men approached the farm, their wagon stopped dead. The horses strained, but the wheels wouldn't turn. A frustrated Jackson is said to have declared, "By the eternal, boys, it is the witch." A disembodied voice from the woods allegedly replied, "All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight." Just like that, the wagon was free. Later that night, one of Jackson's men, a boastful witch tamer, was reportedly beaten and pinched by the invisible force. By morning, Jackson and his spooked men had left, with the general supposedly declaring he'd rather fight the entire British army than deal with the Bell Witch. Now, it's crucial to be clear. This story is almost certainly a legend. Historians find no credible evidence that Andrew Jackson ever visited the Bell farm. His movements were well documented, and this event appears in none of them. It's likely a tall tale that attached itself to an already incredible story. But real or not, the tale of Jackson's defeat shows just how powerful the legend had become. This was no longer just a family's private trouble, the Bell Witch had become a public enemy. If you're finding this slice of American folklore as fascinating as I do, take a moment to conjure the like button and subscribe for more stories where history and the supernatural collide. This story is far from over, and the witch's ultimate plan, according to the legend, was far more sinister than just scaring off a few soldiers. While the witch may have entertained visitors, its true venom was always reserved for John Bell and his daughter, Betsy. The entity's interactions with the rest of the family varied. It showed a strange kindness toward Lucy Bell, John's wife, calling her the most perfect woman living. But for John and Betsy, there was only relentless torment. The entity had a profound, stated hatred for John Bell, whom it mockingly called Old Jack. Its goal, which it stated openly, was to kill him. As John's health began to mysteriously decline, the attacks intensified. He began to suffer from strange seizures and a paralysis in his mouth that made it hard to eat or speak. During these episodes, the witch's shrill voice could be heard cackling and celebrating his suffering. The persecution of Betsy was just as cruel, but focused on her social life. Betsy was engaged to a local man named Joshua Gardner. Kate, however, did not approve. Whenever Joshua visited, the entity would fly into a rage, taunting the young couple and screaming obscenities. The pressure took its toll on Betsy, and on Easter Monday of 1821, she broke off the engagement. The witch had won. This fixation on Betsy's engagement has led to one of the most compelling skeptical theories. It centers on Richard Powell, the local schoolteacher who was 11 years older than Betsy. After her engagement ended, Powell courted and eventually married her. This has led some to wonder if Powell was the witch. Could he have used ventriloquism and tricks to drive away his rival? It's a compelling idea, but it doesn't explain the violent physical attacks witnessed by so many, or how the entity knew secrets Powell couldn't have known. The question remains, was he a cunning manipulator, or just a man who comforted a tormented young woman? By the autumn of 1820, the entity's war against John Bell was reaching its climax. Years of torment had destroyed his health, confining him to bed. The strange seizures grew more frequent and violent. On December 19, 1820, John Bell slipped into a stupor. His son, John Bell Jr., went to the medicine cupboard and found a small, unfamiliar vial with a strange, dark liquid. As the family stood looking at it, the witch's voice reportedly filled the room with glee. "It's useless for you to try to relieve old Jack," she cackled. "I have got him this time. I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, and that has fixed him." Horrified, the family tested the liquid on the cat. The cat convulsed and died almost instantly. It was poison. John Bell never woke up. He died the next morning, on December 20th, 1820. While any official cause of death would have been his mysterious illness, in the minds of the family and community, a different story took hold. A story that became the dark heart of the legend. This is what makes the Bell Witch tale unique in American folklore. It's the only story where a supernatural entity is explicitly blamed for taking a human life. The horror didn't stop there. According to the legend, as friends and family gathered for the funeral, Kate's voice could be heard loudly singing body-drinking songs, a grotesque celebration that continued until the last mourner had left the graveyard. With John Bell dead and Betsy's engagement broken, the main reasons for the haunting seemed to be gone. In the months that followed, the entity's presence faded. The attacks stopped, and the voice fell silent. In April 1821, the entity supposedly spoke to the family one last time, announcing that it was leaving but promising to return in 7 years. True to its word, the legend says it did return in 1828, mostly interacting with John Bell Jr. before departing again. But it left one final, chilling promise: to visit the most direct descendant of John Bell again, 107 years later, in 1935. The Bell Witch haunting is more than just a ghost story. It's arguably America's greatest. But what was it really? A vengeful spirit? An elaborate and cruel hoax by Richard Powell? A case of mass hysteria on the frontier? Or a folktale created to explain a terrifying, undiagnosed neurological disorder that afflicted John Bell? The main challenge for historians is the lack of contemporary evidence. There are no letters or diaries from the time the events were happening. The first detailed, published account of the legend was a book by Martin V. Ingram in 1894, written more than 70 years after the haunting began. Ingram claimed his book was based on the diary of Richard Williams Bell, but that diary has never been found. So, most of what we know comes from this single, much later source, which is based on family stories and oral tradition. Today, more than 200 years later, the legend refuses to die. The town of Adams, Tennessee, is forever linked to its dark history, attracting tourists and paranormal investigators to sites like the Bell Witch Cave. It has become a permanent fixture of American folklore, inspiring countless books and films, including the Blair Witch Project. The story of the Bell Witch endures because it blurs the line between a terrifying legend and the real lives of the Bell family. It's a story with real names, real places, and a very real death at its center. Whether you believe it was a ghost, a hoax, or a symptom of illness, one fact remains. Something happened on the Bell farm. Something so powerful that its story terrified a community, tore apart a family, and is still talked about with a shudder 2 centuries later. It leaves us with an unsettling question. What other nightmares are lurking in the footnotes of history, just waiting to be told?